All right, friends, we're not going to keep our head in the clouds. We're going to put our data in the cloud, specifically with Google's Cloud Firebase tool. So we have a few concepts to go over here. And if the concepts seem a bit much, remember there's always reference material underneath the video. And feel free to watch this again to get a sense of after you've done it, you can go back and say, okay, I understand the concepts, or you can refresh yourself or really solidify your knowledge. But we're going to be working with Cloud Firestore here. By the way, if you go over, Google has a whole set of Firebase documentation here. We've already worked with our authentication area here. So we put some stuff in there, and I think we actually went beyond some of the stuff that's in the Google documentation and covered some of the errors that were, at least in my version of the docs. Cloud Firestore is what we're about to use, so that's where our database is going to exist. And then images are going to be stored in the Firebase storage area. So you can Google this. There's all sorts of sample code in here. When you see the sample code, if you just click on iOS, it'll show you what you need to do for iOS, specifically for Swift. But with that said, we're going to head back over to our console here and make sure that you're in firebase.google.com. Make sure that within your console you've got into your Snacktacular app. So, again, if I start out here in Firebase, we've already created Snacktacular, so click on that. Then if we click on Database up here, since we haven't created any database for our app yet, we get an option here to either use what's called the real-time database, which is the original Firebase database product. The Cloud Firestore database, though, is very, very robust and reliable, and this is what Google is going to be using as its flagship product. And it's not as if this is really easy to use and this is more complex. The usage level is pretty much the same. Cloud Firestore is going to scale much better if your app is really big, so it makes sense for us to learn this. So we'll click on Get Started. Now, one of the first things that we get up here is some information about the access rules for our data. And so what we're going to do in here is we're going to stay in the locked mode here, and that means that nobody can access our data, but then we're going to change the rules that show up. So just leave the start and lock mode selected and then click on Enable. And then what we're going to do down here, we'll see that the rule which is generated says, others can't access this data, but what we're going to do is we're going to change it so that if we have an existing user, so somebody that is successfully logged in the system, we can go ahead and allow them to access the data. So here we are, we have nothing in the data area, but up top you see these tabs that go across. The second one there is rules, so just click on rules. We see these rules show up here, and what we want to change is this one here under match. So you see where it says match and then document equals star star. What we're going to do is we're going to change this to anything. So I'm just going to take the word document there and change it to anything. And then what we're going to do, where it says allowed rewrite if false, what we're going to do instead is we're going to type in if request.auth, meaning, hey, we're going to try to see if we have authenticated somebody here, and then we'll say exclamation point equals, which is not equal to, and then null, which is Google's equivalent of nil, and if you hear null in other computing languages, it's the same as nil. So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, give somebody access to all of the stuff if we can find out that the authorization request, they have been authorized here. So that's all this is. We just click on publish and this will be good. So nobody will be able to access our data unless they've logged in as a user. By the way, you can see that there's a bit of a programming language in here. There are very robust data access rules. And if you have a very complicated app, you can go ahead and set those kinds of rules, have certain users maybe that are sort of have system privileges to be able to delete lots of files or things. But right now, this is going to work perfectly for us. So now let's hop back over and take a look at some of the slides here. And when we talk about data and how it's organized in Cloud Firestore, we have collections, which you can consider them to be almost folders. Those are where several different documents are stored. The documents, you can consider those to be almost like files. So the way that we're going to organize our database is we're going to have a collection called spots. So if you imagine, a folder that holds all of our spots, all of our different restaurants in there, each spot document is going to be a document inside of that folder. And then inside of that document, if you can imagine written on the document, is the data that we've got. So each spot is in a spots collection, each document, or each spot has a document. Those documents also have a unique ID, so this way we don't have to worry about if two spots have the same name or if they share an address. and our document data is going to be there as well. So let's see how this is going to look in Cloud Firestore. So this is what our console is going to look like after we add a bunch of data in here. And just to be able to help you conceptualize how this looks. So we have this spots collection here, and if you were to click on the spots collection, remember this is like a folder that has all of these documents for the different spots in here. So for example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 documents here. Those are for the 7 spots that you see in this particular app right now. So that's how much data that we've got, how many different restaurants or spots we've got. And this one here for El Pelon, it has a unique ID that we don't bother showing the user, but that allows Firestore to distinguish one versus another. Again, consider it to be like the social security number for an individual spot. And within that document, we have all of these fields. We have the address, we've got latitude and longitude, we've got the name of the place, number of reviews. We'll also have there's an average rating up there. We keep track of the posting user ID, so all of this stuff is in there. Now notice that there's also an area up here for collection. Eventually, each spot is going to have an opportunity to have another sort of subfolder or sub-collection in there, and we're actually going to have 2 sub-collections, one that's going to hold all of the photos and one which is going to hold all of the reviews. But right now we've got our spots. Each spot has a document. If you select the unique document number, you're going to see all of the data in there. Now, you can see that that stuff that we have in here too is analogous to the stuff that we've got in our spot class. We haven't yet done anything with this NSObject or MK annotation, so you can ignore that for now, but that'll be important when we'll come back and we'll add that when we work with maps. We just set up our database here, we set up our access rules. Now, one thing to be aware of is whenever we save data out, we're actually going to save it in a dictionary. And so dictionaries, remember, are key value pairs. We've used these when we accessed JSON before. Remember, you know, the different JSON items, we referred to their name, which was a string, and then we got some data back. Well, when we want to save stuff out, we're just going to create a dictionary, which again is brackets, key value pairs, where the first thing is a string, colon, the second thing is whatever data type we're passing, and commas separate the individual key value pairs. So we're going to pass in something called name, so that's the key where we can get the name data, and that'll be in spot.name. The address is in spot.address. And again, the reason it says any here is because you know, some of them are going to be strings, some of them are going to be doubles, some of them are going to be integers, or we can use all those different types, I should say, it's more accurate. And so you can see, you know, this is sort of what a dictionary would look like after it's created. So each of the different key value pairs is separated by commas, the key and the value are separated by colons. So name, El Pelon, address, this is the address, the latitude, the longitude. You can see these are numbers, they're not in quotes. So it gives you a sense of what we've got here. Now, a few things as we get ready to build this out. You might have seen we have latitude and longitude in there, but we don't save currently in our class a latitude or longitude data structure. What we have is simply a coordinate data structure. But unfortunately, Google does not support Apple's CL location degrees object, which has, you know, latitude and longitude associated with the coordinate. So what we're going to do is we are going to create properties that are computed properties. Whenever the user wants a latitude, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into our existing property called coordinate and just return coordinate.latitude. Same thing with longitude. So what's nice about this is just, you know, we can go ahead now and refer to latitude and longitude. We never have to update these two values individually as long as we've saved our coordinate, and we can pull that stuff out. Now, one more thing that we're going to do with this computed property stuff is we are going to create a computed property called a dictionary. And what's great is anytime we have a spot, we can refer to spot.dictionary. And what will happen here is it will return a key value pair, which looks sort of like this. And we can see that we've got all of the key values in here and all of the data that we're going to pass in here as well, and it'll just send this stuff back out to whenever we need to use it. The advantage of this is, and again, we're getting a little bit of ahead of ourselves, but whenever we want to save, we can just call spot.dictionary, or within the class, we can say self.dictionary, and it will give us a string any dictionary here with all the stuff assigned. Now, if you look at this, the one thing that we don't have is our document ID. Google is actually going to create this for us. We'll show you how we do that in a bit. So that's not part of the dictionary to save because that's going to be the name that Google has, and we can always refer back to our name. But everything else we create. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and actually set up these computed properties. So we're going to hop over to our code and get into, now the place where we're going to put this is actually in Spot because that's where we want this data. The first thing that we want to do is set up latitude and longitude. So I'll say var longitude colon, and this is going to be, if we say CL location degrees in here, this is Apple's name for the data type that it assigns to longitude and latitude. But you see how it says double right next to it? This is just an alias. So, Google sort of reminds us, hey, this is meant to represent location degrees, but it's the same exact thing as a double. Totally cool for us to go ahead and use this because we can save doubles to Cloud Firestore. So when we say var colon CL location degrees, then we open and close a parenthesis in here, and what we're going to do is we're simply going to return coordinate, which is this value that we have up here, dot longitude. And so again, we never assign a value to longitude, but we can just say, hey, give me the longitude, so like spot.longitude, and it'll interrogate the coordinate value, pull out the longitude, and send it back to us. We'll do the same thing with latitude. Latitude, colon, it's also a CL location degree. And we say return, you guessed it, coordinate dot latitude. And now we're going to do one other commuted property here too, and we're going to call this dictionary. So again, we can refer to spot.dictionary, and what this is going to do, after the colon here, I put an open bracket here, and I say string, comma, any, which means this should return a key value pair, and each of the key value pairs is separated by a comma. And whoops, I said string colon any, and I typed in a comma in there. So we've got our key value pair in here, and now what we want to do is we want to say, hey, what are we going to return here? And what we're going to return is simply going to be a dictionary. So dictionaries, like arrays, are always within brackets here. And then we're going to put in the different items that we've got. So the keys are always going to be the same as the variable name. And in fact, it might be useful just to kind of copy what we've got here so we can make sure that we're spelling it properly. So we'll say return in quotes name, so start quote, name, close double quote, colon, and then just name. And then I'll say comma, and then we're going to open quote for address. I'll copy that in, paste it in, close quote, colon, address. So again, this is the string that represents the key, and if we say, hey, dictionary, and then in bracket, and then in quote name, it's going to give us the name value. If we say address, it's going to give us the address value, and we'll keep working through this. We're not going to do it for coordinate, but we're going to do it for longitude and latitude. So the key is longitude in quotes, colon, longitude, and then we're going to do the same for latitude. So again, I'll just copy this. Latitude in quotes, latitude, colon, latitude, comma, and let's see, what else do we want to put in here? Latitude average review rating. So we start out a double quote, average review rating, close quote, colon, average review rating. We'll do the same thing with number of reviews. Double quote, number of reviews, close quote, colon, number of reviews, comma, for posting user ID. We do open double quote, posting user ID, close double quote, colon, posting user ID, comma, and we're not going to worry about document ID. And again, because that's the name of the document will be the document ID, so we're not going to save the document ID inside of the document ID. Now this is it. So anytime we need a dictionary to save, we just say spot.dictionary, and bloop, it'll come together with all this stuff in the format that we need in order to save it. So let's hop back over and look at some slides to see what's up next. I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to structure this code, and we're going to try to use a little bit more of the MVC pattern to set up our code. Now, in some of the tutorials that you see, they don't necessarily take MVC in the tutorials, and what we're going to do is hopefully learn how to write our code a little bit better in ways that are more maintainable. So what we're going to try to avoid here is sometimes when people talk about what MVC, which is Model View Controller, is trying to correct, it's MVC, meaning Massive View Controller. And you might see, hey, you've got a lot of stuff in here. If we have all of our data access in here as well, our view controller is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, as you progress as a developer, you'll learn how you can sort of break out other components too, maybe for some of the things that you've got in your extensions or what have you. But if you want to go ahead and make some changes, well, let's imagine if you have all of your data access in different view controllers. So we've got some stuff which might be in the detail view controller, some in the list view controller. We'll eventually have some stuff that's in reviews and in photos. And if we wanted to change, say, from one API to another, if we had to go ahead and hunt into each of these different Swift files, updating and making changes would be really difficult. So Google has already updated their flagship database from something called Firebase, real-time database, to Cloud Firestore. And so being able to make that change would be really, really difficult. And you can see all the places where the code for these guys might be impacted by it. What we're instead going to do is use this MVC model view controller design pattern. And the model is going to be all of our data. And that includes custom structs and classes. So we've got several custom classes and we're going to create more. And also how we access them. So how do we save them and how do we load data in? How do we update data? We'll put this all in one place. Now, as we'll see in the next slide, one of the beautiful things about this is if we decide we want to make a change to, where are we saving the data, or how are we accessing the data? If we want to switch from maybe a Google product to an Amazon product, we do it simply within the model, within any classes that will access this, as opposed to hunting through all of our view controller code. So we'll see, simply when we want to load stuff, we'll just create something that's a load data or a .save data method, and it'll really compartmentalize things easily for us. What are views? So views include anything that's a UI view object. So Apple actually gives us views. Some people consider these to be dumb renderers, although when we write custom classes, we've also got some code in there too. So we'll consider our view to be things like the UI table view cells and collection cells that we'll write custom. And then the controller is typically the stuff that we've got in view controllers. And there are other ways to break this out, but I think, at least as we start with this, it will be very helpful. Another thing which makes this really useful too is, our database can be used for iOS, for Android, or for the web. So, if we go ahead and we set up our data structure really solidly, hopefully we can reuse at least the structure that we've got in other products too, even though you might need to rewrite from Swift to Android is now, they're using a language called Kotlin, which actually is very Swift-like, and there are lots of ways to code in for the web. So why do we want to break stuff out into MVC? Why don't we want to take stuff out of the controller and put it into the model, or migrate the rendering stuff into the view? Well, again, we separate the logic so, it makes it easier for us to work on different platforms, but also it can enable simultaneous development. So somebody could say, hey, you handle, the creation of the custom cells. Why don't you handle, working with these different view controllers? Why don't you handle all the model stuff, getting data in or putting data out, and just give me some methods to be able to deal with that? We haven't dealt with Xcode's testing features, but there are also some testing features where if things are really compartmentalized, it's easier to write tests to, run through all the different options and see if your code breaks or doesn't break. So that's something you'll learn later on in your career as an iOS developer. It's much easier to maintain this stuff, as I'd mentioned. If you want to migrate from one platform to another, or if you decide, oh, I've got an error in saving, you just go one place and make the change. And it also helps quite a bit with reuse too, because you've got distinct components, and you can reuse them almost like Legos. Now, it's not perfect. There's not necessarily an agreement on the best way to implement MVC inside of iOS. You'll see lots of developers do things that are slightly different. And also, iOS has a thing called a view controller, which really is the controller, but it makes it easier to mix lots of components together. There are also competing design patterns too. So Apple actually uses MVC internally. So this is the structure that Apple uses. But as you read more blogs online or books or things like that, you might run across MVVM, something called Viper, something called MVP, so lots of other different things as well. But we are going to go ahead and we are going to save all of our stuff and load all of our stuff within our classes so that we don't have that stuff in our view controller code. So that's why I gave this little introduction here. So in order to set up Firestore to do some MVC style saving, we're going to do it in the Spot class. We're going to import Firebase there. Then we're going to create a save data method. And in that, what we will do is whenever we need to save or load data, we'll just create an instance of Firestore here, which just says DB, and we'll set that to be equal to Firestore. And the DB here it's a convention you'll see most folks using when they want to refer to their database. Now by setting this up, this just gives us a bunch of data structures and methods that allow us to access and use the database. So you'll see a lot of stuff hang off this DB once we create it. It just essentially says, this plugs us into Firestore. Now, remember when we want to create data to save, it's got to be a dictionary, but if we just call self.dictionary, boom, we've got it inside of our spot. It'll grab all of our spot data and turn it into a dictionary. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check one of two things. Do we have an existing document ID, meaning did somebody save this already? And so if self document ID doesn't equal an empty string here, then what we're going to do is we're just going to say set data at whatever that document ID is. If we don't have an existing document ID, meaning the document ID is equal to 0, then we're going to create a new document ID, which is what this add document stuff does. And that creates that unique, I refer to this, these are the document IDs here. These are like the social security numbers for the individual spots. So add document will create a new one of these. Set will update these. It is possible that you don't have to use a unique item if you've already got a unique item there as well, but we're going to go ahead and just have Google go ahead and create the new document when we need it. So this is the code that we're going to type in. First, let's go ahead, though, and set up the import Firebase. We're going to do all of this within the Spot class, and then we'll show you how we call this in our code in just a bit. So here we are in Spot. Let's go ahead and under import core location, we'll do import Firebase. And what we'll do down here now is we will go ahead and create a method which will be func save data in our method. And I'll start this out with no parameters, but then I'll show you, why we do have to add a parameter in here. We're going to create it as an escaping closure. Well, actually, why don't we just go ahead and do that right now? So we've worked with these escaping completion handlers, I should say, before. So we'll just give it the completion word here, colon, escaping. And what we'll do is, we haven't passed out values before, but we're going to pass a value out that says bool, which is just going to be, hey, did we save the data or did we get an error? And there's going to be no subsequent data which is passed out of our completion handler here. So again, what we're essentially going to say is, hey, when we call save data, we can put a set of curly braces behind, and don't execute the curly braces behind any save data call until we verified that we have actually saved the data. And, we're going to get a true or false in there too. So, we can branch off and do things if it worked or if we got an error. That said, let's go ahead. We said the first thing that we want to do is we want to create an instance of Firestore. So we just say let db equals, and we can call it anything, but db is good. You'll see a lot of tutorials use db. We'll say capital Firestore dot lowercase Firestore and 2 open and close parentheses. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab the user ID. And remember we've got this auth class that we can interrogate here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a guard statement, which just says guard let posting user ID equal, and we're going to have the posting user ID just equal auth dot and then lowercase auth open and close parentheses dot current, and see current user shows up here. So this is the user with all those different data structures in there, and we're going to say question mark dot UID. And if we didn't put in the question mark, Google would write that. So this just says, hey, did you go through your authentication? And if you did, let's see if you got a current user. Do you have a current user? That's what the question mark is all about. And if it is, all right, let's go ahead and get the user ID there. Now, because this is a guard statement, we'll say else. What do we do if we don't have an authorized user? So we get nil when we do this. Well, if we do, we're going to do a return, and we'll say completion, because that's the word we're going to use here. I think sometimes we've used completed, sometimes we've used completion. Let's go ahead and use completed instead. That's probably, I think that's consistent with what we've done before. But again, this is just kind of a variable indicator flag. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return false. So we just put in the false Boolean here, because see how this is being passed back? That just says, hey, we've got an error. We can also print out to the user as well an error, or I shouldn't say to the user, really to the console, because hopefully you'll never see this show up unless we've got an error in our code. And we'll say error colon could not save data because we don't have a valid posting user ID. So hopefully you will never have that as a problem. So now let's go ahead and we assume at this point we do have a posting user ID. So what we'll do is we'll say self.posting user ID equals, and whatever we got back from this posting user ID here. So again, we get this from Firebase, and if it works, then we slap it into the posting user ID property. So that's what we mean by the self down here. So now that we've got our user ID, what we did here is essentially updated any value that we wouldn't have had when we passed in here. So we just make sure that we've got a user ID. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create the dictionary. representing the data we want to save. And the way that we do this is we'll just create a constant called data to save. So let data to save equal, and this is just going to be self.dictionary. And again, what this does, and I typed that really quickly, but again, when we get to dictionary here, you see how it's string any, this is key value pairs here. This here says, okay, give me the dictionary. So it's going to go up here. This is a computed property, and it's going to return a dictionary made up of all of these properties up here that we want to use, say, for the document ID. So that's looking good. Now we've got our data that we want to save. We've updated our user as well, which is really great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if we have saved a record, we'll have a document ID. And just I put a little bit extra in the comments. And we're putting the comments in here too, just so you can go back and sort of reread these. And if you want to reuse these in your own project too, you can get a sense of the steps. So we'll say if self.documentID does not equal empty string. So this says we've got a document. So what we're going to do is just set our data, which is updating the existing data at the document ID. So what we do here is first we create a reference for the document that we want to save. So what we do is we say ref db dot, and then we go into the collection document. So we'll say collection. What is the name of our collection? It's going to be spots. Just to remind you, on our slides, if we went back here and saw what things look like, see, this is the spots collection, and then this is what the document ID is going to be right here. So we've got our spots collection, and then we say dot, and different options show up, but we're going to say, is it set document that we want in here? Nope, just we're going to refer first to the document, I should say. So let's go ahead and do document, and specifically, we're going to put in the path of the document here. So right here, we're just saying, okay, this is where we want to work. We want to work inside of that spots folder, the spots collection, and then the document that we're going to refer to is going to be self.documentID. So we verified we had one here. And once we get the path, this is where we can go ahead and we can say ref dot, whoops, where am I? This is where we can go and say ref dot set data, and look at what set data wants. It wants a string any, which is our dictionary that we were able to grab up here. So, and we created that as data to save. You could just go ahead and say self.dictionary in here, but you know, it's good to sort of do this and make sure, you know, we don't have any errors or anything like that, but you could have just grabbed this and slapped it right in there. That would have been fine as well. Now, after we do this, what we're going to do is we get a completion handler, which could possibly pass back something which is an error. So we'll give it the name error, which is this error code here, and then we'll say in. So again, after our data to save, open and close curly for the completion handler here. It's error and then in. And then inside of this completion handler, we'll say if let error equal error. That means, hey, we've got an error. And if we do have an error here, we're going to do the return completion false here. And actually, we don't need a return here. We could just say completion equals false. We need a return when we're in the guard statement, but not necessarily here. And we should also print out something to the console just so that the developer knows. Hopefully you will never ever see this, but we'll say error, updating document, and then inside I can say self.documentID, and then afterward what we can do here is if we say error.localized description, this will actually give you a little string that says what the error is all about. So let's see, it's not called completion, it's called completed. That's why I got the error there. But if we don't have the error here, then what we can do is we can just, we'll say else, and we'll say completed true. Just, again, that's the flag that, hey, we're done, we saved this. And if you want, you can just say, you know, a little flag in here that says document updated with ref ID, and you can say ref.documentID, which, you know, again, just grabs the document ID that we saved, which is going to be the same as self.documentID. So just, and again, I'll put, oh, how about caret, 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 just to, you know, distinguish from star, 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 which are errors in there. You can delete this. There's no reason why this is anything that you need to pay attention to other than, hooray, it worked. So what we had said up here with this curly brace, and see where it ends down here. So just if I go back and forth, I can see this turning yellow here. So this is where I want to put my else. So the first thing that we did was we said if we have a saved record, but if we don't have a saved record, then what we're going to do here is first we'll say we'll also create that the reference variable here, but we'll declare it, but we won't populate it until the next line. So we'll say document ref and question mark nil. So this is just let Firestore create the new document ID. And the way that we have it do that is we just refer to this ref. We say db.collection, and then we say spots. And again, you want to really make sure that's all lowercase spots here, or you use the same thing in both locations. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say add document. Now what add document is going to do is it's going to create a new document with an automatically generated document ID, which is going to be unique. So we'll say add document in here, and then what are we going to add in? We're going to have that data equal our data to save, which is our dictionary. So either we say set document at this location, and then check to see if we did it. Otherwise, we're going to say, okay, add document with data to save, and it'll create a new document for us. And at the end of this, there's also going to be the completion handler, which is either going to give us this, and I did this in parentheses up here, error in parentheses. You don't need to have the parentheses in there too, so we can just say straight up error. Notice if you type in and then you press enter really quickly like you're code completing, this will put in an image. We don't want that, so you'll get used to typing in whenever you work with the Google stuff, and then escaping, and then you can press enter here. So you want the word in there instead of Xcode trying to put an image in that starts with in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate again just as we did up here. In fact, we can grab this code, this if let error code in here, copy it, paste it in, and if we get an error up here, we're going to say error creating new document, and then what I'll do is I'll just send back here the localization error because we don't have a doc ID here. Otherwise, we'll say new document created with reference such and such. And let's see, do we have everything? This is being grumpy at me right here. Let's see what this doesn't like. Doesn't like the document ref, and it says undeclared type document ref, and yes, there is no document ref. I should have used code completion for document reference. So now it's fixed, and this is going to go ahead and this will save our data. Let's see, it's still grumping at something else in here. Let's see what it wants to do. It wants to fix this. What I'll do is I'll just do nil coalescing here, and I'll say unknown. So either we have a document ID that we can report back and say, hey, this is where our error occurred. Otherwise, we're going to say, hey, there's no known document. Let's see what this doesn't like here. Can I? Yeah, so if I put a question mark in there, that'll work. So great. So we are now done. We've created a save data function. So how do we go ahead and call this save data function? Well, if we take a look here, we were talking about better code through MVC. So we put our save data function inside of Spot. Now the way that we call it is simply in our code here for our save button press. We're going to say spot.saveData, and remember we're going to get that parameter back, the Boolean, which we have a success. It's either true or false. If it's true, then we're ready to leave. Otherwise, we're just going to print a message here. We could put in an alert which told the user, hey, I couldn't save your data. And if you want to go back and do that, that's a nice exercise for you. You know, we've actually written a reusable function here for that error. But one other thing that I want to point out here is normally what we do when we press on save is then we do an unwind segue back, we pass our data back, we do a prepare for segue. We're not going to do any of that here. And the reason we're not going to do any of this here is that we're going to use something very special. We're going to create inside of our spots class is we're going to say, hey, whenever something changes in spots, load up the data to reflect that change. So since that's going to happen automatically, we don't have to do the formal passing of data back, the unwind function that we have. We're just going to go ahead and we can use the same code that we do when we cancel here because we've already verified we've saved. Cancel just says, all right, either go and dismiss or go ahead and pop, and it's always going to be a dismiss here because we're adding with a plus. So, but we'll just reuse this little chunk of code here. We'll put the same thing in for the save button. Actually, I should have said cancel button here. I do. And so let's go ahead and update that code. So we're going to get back into spot detail view controller.swift. Let's scroll to our save button pressed. And what we're going to do for save button pressed is we're simply going to say spot dot save data, and then we get our little completion handler in here. So what save data is we can actually go ahead and simply do an open and close parenthesis after this, and what we're going to get back is a value that you can call it anything, but success is pretty good. It's going to be a Boolean value. We'll say in, and then we'll say if success, else we're not going to execute out of here, and we'll just print to the console error, couldn't leave this view controller because data wasn't saved. And again, if you want to put a message up for the user, you can certainly do that, but hopefully the user will never see this because the code we're going to write is going to be rock solid. And whoops, I put my period outside of my quotes there. So what do we do if we have success? We're actually going to do the same code that we have when cancel button is pressed. So why don't we write a little function here that repeats this. We'll call it, so I just highlighted the cancel button pressed code. I'm going to create a function here just underneath update user interface. We'll call this func leave view controller. It has no parameters, and it's got these 6 lines in here, which will just do everything that we do in cancel. Then we can call right in here if we have a success in our save button pressed. We'll say self.leave view controller, and also down in here in cancel we can say leave view controller 2. So what we do when cancel is we don't save. What we do if we do press save is we try to save, and if we have saved we can segue away, or we can cancel out and get back to the previous one. Otherwise we'll print an error. Let's see if this works. So we're going to go ahead and build and run. And actually what I'm going to do as part of the build and run too is I'm going to hop over and I'm going to take a look at our data in here. So if we click on data, we have nothing inside of Snacktacular. But let's see what happens when we get our when our app is running. Here we go. We're up and running. I actually didn't change it to iPhone 10, so hopefully everything I set up renders differently on the other. I think this is an 8 Plus, so we'll go ahead and we'll log in. I've never used this one before, so it might need me to log in from scratch. Again, it sort of treats each iPhone simulator as a different one in here, so I can go ahead and log in with my John Gallagher credentials. Now I'm going to click on plus, and so here we go up here. What do we want to enter? I'm just going to go ahead and select maybe how about Neptune oysters? So I'll just click on this guy here. It puts in data from Neptune oyster, which is great. Now I'm going to click on save, cross our fingers. Does it work? So we don't see anything here because we haven't done anything to read the data in, but I'm going to go back in here into my database, and up in the URL area, I'm just going to press enter to reload this page. And what we should see in here is we see a spots collection, we see a unique ID that was created, and we see all the information for Neptune, including, whoops, it looks like we've got one error here for latitude and longitude. I must have not put in the proper I must have put in the same thing for both of them. So I'm just going to go back over here. Let me take a look at my spot.swift. Shame on me. Yep, I typed longitude for both instead of latitude. Should have the latitude parameter in here too. By the way, so now that I've done this, I can go back and do this on iPhone 10 now if I want to. I'm going to quit out of this and hop over to our Firebase console. And you might say, okay, I screwed this up, so I want to make a change here. How do I delete this data? By the way, you can even click on it if you wanted to type in your own data. You just click on the little pencil mark next to these different data items. But I want to delete this whole document here. So under where it says the name of this document, where there are the 3 dots, one on top of another, if I just click on that and say delete the document, not the fields, but the whole document there, I'll do a start delete, and it'll actually get rid of that. So now I have no spots in there. But if I build and run again, I should find that everything works fine. I can recreate Neptune oyster or put it in a different place. So we're still using our dumb read data. What we're going to do next is we are going to get our load data working, and we're actually going to load the data in the spots class. So we'll use a number of the concepts that we've done so far. We'll refer back to, we saved data as a dictionary. We're going to get data out as a dictionary too. So we're actually going to write an initializer where we can pass the dictionary in, and then from that create a class from it, or I'll update all of our class data here. But let's go ahead and plus, and let me go back into, I want to see both my console as well as my iPhone running here. I'm going to say look up a place. I deleted Neptune Oyster, so if I want to get back to Neptune Oyster here, click on this, click on save, and let's see. So I guess, once you've updated this once, for some reason it looks like Chrome will go ahead and make the changes dynamically behind the scenes. And when we click on Neptune Oyster, we see all the Neptune Oyster stuff here. Now we have the appropriate longitude and latitude, looking good. You saved in the cloud, baby. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to read that stuff in. Loading is coming up next. Keep at it.